Well, howdy y'all, welcome back to The Social Regressive. The recent review that I did on the Arken SH4 Gen 2 4-16 by 50 millimeter scope generated a lot of controversy, and I appreciate all you guys that commented in the video. There were a lot of questions, a lot of very blunt answers, and yeah, it was interesting to see how really the whole thing could actually be boiled down into one big question that I was seeing through all the comments. Even in things that were statements of fact, you know, that kind of thing. It was all leading toward one question of when do you choose glass quality versus features? And this is one that I never got into in that 17-part optics series that I did. I'll link to it up here if you want to check it out. But I got into the various features, functions, and qualities of rifle scopes and how you can pick the scope that's best for you and what you're actually going to be doing at the range or out in the field. So today we're going to add one more video. We'll make it an 18-part series, and we're going to talk about when you want to pick glass quality versus features. And we have a broad variety of scopes here. Now, you may not believe it by watching that last video, but this is not a cut and dried, clear answer. This is something that you're going to have to answer for yourself. And what I'm going to do is set up a little algorithm for you today so you can ask yourself, you know, based on what you're trying to do, which type of scope will work for you. A lot of us are on a budget and we can't afford to get the best glass quality and the best features at the same time. And if we can, we might not be able to afford the weight, because usually a scope that has all of those things is going to weigh a ton. It's going to be a gigantic scope. So there are always compromises. It doesn't matter what kind of scope you're going to get. You're going to have to pick your battles, pick what you want, and then determine what scope you want based on all of that. So let me kick this off with a story. When my brother and I got into our very first rifles, we each got varmint rifles. They were both Savage 12 FVs. His was in 22-250, mine was in 243 Winchester. And he picked his scope first. He had looked at magazines, he had, you know, looked on the internet, looked up all kinds of different things to see, okay, what kind of scope does he want to put on this rifle? He wants to be able to shoot small groups and hit small things. And in the end, he took home a Leupold VX2. I think it was a 3-12 or a 4-12. It had a simple crosshair in it, but it had very good glass. And with that, we took it out one day and we were trying to hit prairie dog sized targets at 200 yards, maybe a little bit further. And we were having a whole lot of fun, but we were also wasting a whole lot of ammunition, because that scope, no matter how good its image quality was, it really just wasn't set up for, number one, figuring out how far away the target was. It didn't have any kind of ranging reticle or anything. It was just a very simple crosshair. And then it also really, at the time, you couldn't rely so much on turret tracking in a lot of those scopes, so a lot of the time we didn't really mess with it. If you got a good target scope, you could rely on those, but for a lot of your field type, deer type scopes, they weren't well known for coming back to zero afterward or tracking reliably. So yeah, we were just kind of flinging lead all over the place. It was fun when we made a hit, but mostly it was just kind of Kentucky windage and holding over and just trying to guess at where we were supposed to hit. And at this time, you may say, just get yourself a rangefinder. At the time, rangefinders were very expensive, and they were not really precise enough to be able to get onto, say, an orange-sized target at 200 odd yards, especially for the price tags that we could have afforded. So what I did is I went in a different direction. I picked up this. This is a Mueller 8.5-25 by 44 millimeter adjustable objective scope. They still sell these. They run for about 165 bucks. I'll put a link down below if you want one. These are very simple, second focal plane reticle, but it had some things that I desperately needed. It had decent target turrets that I could spin up here, and more importantly, it had a mil-dot reticle on the inside. And this was something that was not actually all that common at the time. There were very few scope makers that were including reticles that you could use for ranging or for holding over and holding off for wind. This was kind of a freak, especially at its price point. I think at the time I ended up paying about 200 bucks for this one. They were more expensive then. And with this, I really started to make some hits. Its glass is nowhere near as good as that VX2, but it was good enough to allow me to see my target, to be able to range it using the mil dots, and I had my little range card that I made. Everything was kind of custom at the time. They didn't have these cool apps that you could put on your phones. They didn't even have the cool phones at the time. So yeah, I had my own little range card that I carried around with me or stuck on the side of my, my butt pad here. And with that, I was able to start increasing my accuracy, especially on prairie dogs. I probably started out making, it was probably like a 1 in 10 kind of kill ratio. And then as I started getting more used to this and more used to ranging and more used to taking those shots where I'm holding off and holding over for wind, then with this, even though it didn't have the best glass, I was getting up to, you know, maybe 1 in 3, 1 in 2, and eventually maybe even a little bit better than that, where I wasn't wasting ammunition. I was able to make a first round hit. So this one was feature rich, the other one was glass rich. With this one, I could adjust my parallax up here. I could dial if I wanted to. Mostly I just used the reticle. And for me, this really worked out well. And maybe this is a dilemma that you find yourself in right now, especially if you are on a tight budget. You gotta pick one or the other. Maybe it's a simple scope with good glass, or maybe it's something feature rich, where you can't really see all that much. Now what I have on the table is a broad spread of things that kind of are in between all of these. Of all of the glass that you see here on the table, this Mueller is probably the worst. Or no, actually, I take that back. It's the Arken. I forgot. I actually compared everything that you see here on the table and a few others that I have back in the garage. And of everything that I tested, this one was the worst, with the exception of one really cheap scope. That's just how bad the image is. But everything on here is going to be maybe, you know, kind of similar or a little bit better. And some of these are going to get into very good glass and some really good features as well. Okay, let's take a look at something that's a little bit more along the line of that VX2 that my brother had. This is the Xerotech Thrive 3-12 by 44. I'll put a link to the review up here. This is a somewhat simple scope. The only complexity this has to it is it has a little bit of complexity in the reticle. It's not really a milled dot sort of setup, so it's not, you know, these perfect lines that you're used to. This is designed for some kind of broader applications where you're dealing with maybe larger targets and you're making kind of longer holds on it. So it's a reticle that works. It's called the PH3 and it's pretty cool, but it doesn't have that universal appeal of mill dot or like a Christmas tree or whatever. But the only other thing that makes it a little funky is the side parallax adjustment. Great feature. So yeah, a little bit higher magnification. Essentially this is a deer or an elk kind of scope. And this is one that just kind of extends those capabilities so that you could use this for some light varminting if you wanted. And you can see that it's capped turrets. They do track well, I've already tested that, but it's not something that you want to dial around on a whole lot. So this is not going to be a long range type of scope. If you are the kind of person that is looking for a good scope for deer hunting or elk hunting and that kind of thing, then if you know what your purpose is, then this is going to be a good scope for you. But that kind of gets to the real questions themselves. In that optics series that I put together, that 17-part series, my main question to everybody before you began looking at any of the features or qualities is, what is it that you're trying to do? What is your target? The target is the most important thing. What size is it? How far away is it? How many of them are there? Are they dangerous? Are they mobile? Those are the kinds of questions that you have to ask before you even start thinking about what scope or maybe even what caliber you're going to be using out in the field. That completely applies to this as well. If you are going to be shooting at steel targets at your range at maybe a maximum of 200 yards, then the glass on this is going to be just fine. The Arken SH4 Gen 2 is going to be able to get you on target. You'll probably be able to see some of your bullet holes okay. And yeah, it'll function for that. Now, because of that purpose, its elevation adjustment and all that is going to be a waste. You're not ever going to be using it, but it is up to the task. And some of the others on this bench will be good for that too. The Mueller, just fine out to, I kind of max it out at about 600 yards. It doesn't have much adjustment range. It's high magnification and it can't really see mirage all that well. So this is something that I use for kind of mid-range varminting, 300 yards, probably 400 yards max. And it can kind of keep up with that. the Bushnell AR optics that I'm about to do a review on, and I'll put a link when that eventually appears. But this one is actually pretty feature rich. It has a bunch of stuff going on, but its glass is okay. You know, it's pretty good. This is one that I would also kind of put into that range where you're dealing with things from up close out to, you can make hits at 600 yards with this if you wanted, but it's going to be lacking some of that clarity, so you can't read wind and all that. So I'd probably call it like a 300-yard scope, somewhere in there. So with that question in mind of what we're hitting, how large it is, how far away it is, and all that other stuff, we need to start adding in environmental factors when we're talking about scope choice and its qualities. If I am in a kind of a homogeneous area, like say if I'm shooting in North Dakota, the wind that's hitting me is probably the same wind that's out there. It's just so flat. It's going to be pretty homogeneous. If there are any changes, I can probably read them in the grass out there and all that. But here in Oklahoma, things get weird. If you're in hilly country, rocky country, you're going to find that winds may be moving in opposite directions between you and your target. And that's where reading the wind becomes more important than maybe having a whole bunch of features. You have to be able to see in order to make the hit. But then of course, you get back to this whole catch-22. If you can see the wind, but you don't have the features to be able to get on the target, what do? I think this is where you have to ask yourself a question about what you're going to be doing out in the field. Picture the shot that you'll actually have to take, where you're going to be, what the weather is going to be like. Maybe for a certain animal, it's going to be cold weather. There are going to be certain things about it. Picture all that in your head. And then in your mind, put one of these scopes in front of you. If it's something that has a simple crosshair reticle and doesn't have a lot of features, but it's really bright and clear, can you make a shot with that? Can you make that hit? Conversely, swap in something that has an image that's really mushy and washed out, like this Barska that I've got over on the other end of the table. It doesn't belong to me, but we'll use it as kind of a foil here. It has an adjustable objective, it has a little bit more of a complicated reticle, it has good turrets and all that, but its image is a mess. Can you make the shot with that? I think that's the question you'll have to ask yourself if you're like me, you're on a budget and you want to be able to pick one over the other. Now you might say to yourself, if I just throw money at this, I can fix it. I can get good glass and good features. And you're absolutely right. If you do take up your budget quite a bit, then you can get into all the features at the right time. Like here with the Zerotech, you can get this for about $900 to $1,000 right now, I think, in the US market. Zerotech Trace Advanced, you get a very broad zoom ratio on this. You get really good turrets, locking turrets. I think it has a zero stop, side parallax adjustment, complicated Christmas tree reticle. And yeah, you're going to be taking the price tag up and getting all that stuff, but there's always a drawback, and one of those might be weight. Maybe you're packing more weight out into the field than you really want to, and you're making your rifle something that's going to be difficult to hold in place for an offhand shot. You might also, in this case, be kind of limited on how much you can actually track the scope up and down. Because this has such good glass and all the features on the inside, this only has, I think, 17 mils of vertical adjustment on it. Then you run out of room. Okay, so we'll fix that. We'll make the tube bigger. So you get into something like a 34 millimeter, and this thing weighs about as much as a tank. So yeah, there's always a trade-off. There's always something to lose. And what you have to do, like I mentioned, is just picture what you're actually going to be doing. And then I think from there you can figure out what kind of scope. And that's one of the things that I try to do with all the reviews that I've done here on the channel, all the scope reviews, all the gear reviews. I try to talk about what the function of these things is and who's going to benefit from it and at what kind of distances and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you want to see more scope reviews, I'll put them up here. We have a bunch more on the way. I have a handful of scopes I'm testing, like this Falcon and some other things. I think the overall takeaway today is ask yourself those questions. What are you really going to be doing out in the field? What is the terrain? What's the environment? How are things going to be working for you? And then ask yourself, could I make the shot with a scope of one type versus another? Am I realistically going to get it within maybe one shot? Am I going to get it within three? Which one is going to give me the best chance of success? Especially if you're on a budget, that's the question you have to ask yourself. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks a lot to patrons of the Destructive Arts for making this happen. If you have anything else you'd like to throw in, please put them down in the comments below. I really appreciate hearing from all of you, and I'll see you around.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Even if you didn't like this particular content, go ahead and subscribe. There's probably something coming that's more up your alley. Check out this playlist right here. This is going to have videos in a similar vein to what you just watched. These two videos we cherry-picked for you. And finally, The Social Regressive is on Patreon. So you can become a patron of the Destructive Arts and earn some goodies while helping us to provide high-quality videos just by kicking us a few bucks a month. Thanks a bunch for your patronage.